Hey, everybody. Welcome on in. And there is Amanda. How's it going? Amanda, I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hear me now?
There you are.
Awesome. Sorry. Every time I'm in a new tool, I have to change my microphone configurations.
And this is a new one. I know not many folks have used Webinar TV before, but I look, open source webinar platform gives us a channel for these all to be stored on, and it doesn't cost what one of its competitors does. So we're all about accessibility here. And I see folks coming on in. We've got I think we've got 11 folks in here, 14 registered. All right, so we'll give it another minute or two. I think we had around 30, 35 folks registered for it.
Cool. So, awesome.
Yeah. How's it going out there, Amanda?
Well, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and we had fake spring for the last couple of days, which happens every year where we think like summer's coming, and today it is sad and gray out. So fake spring is officially over, which is always kind of a bummer.
We had, they kind of pulled the rug on us here in New York too. It seemed like it was like we were through it, and I think DC probably had the cherry blossoms, and then they probably, now I don't know what the temperature is down there, but there's a good chance that they come out for a day or two and they die and go back to. We got to wait another year, so hopefully DC is staying warm. I always think about them this time of year.
I think I saw on the news that they had the earliest cherry blossoms in years and years, that they bloomed earlier than they have for a really long time. So
maybe that's good, or maybe it means they're gonna freeze.
Maybe they're not gonna make it for very long. So
I know. All right. Well, we're about 5 minutes past the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know it's still middle of the day on the West Coast, and Amanda's got more than enough things keeping her busy these days. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll let more folks pile in as we go. Thanks everybody so much for joining, and Amanda, thank you for being here with us today. This is going to be hugely insightful, and Amanda and I have had a conversation about some of the sage wisdom that she's prepared to share today. So I'm excited for everybody. For folks who are joining us, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We can't see you, so we'd love to know who's here, and that would be fantastic. And then feel free as we're going to kind of ask some questions in the chat on the right, and we'll save at least half the time for Q&A. So I'll just briefly introduce Amanda. I'm really excited, and she'll do a better job, I'm sure. But just to brag on her a little bit, Amanda has been kind of in the defense tech industry, in and out of the defense tech industry, and some of the biggest and most exciting, fast-growing companies over the better part of the last, kind of 15 or so years. She was one of the first recruiters at Palantir, and kind of helped them through their global expansion. She was a really early joiner at Asana, and then became the kind of interim head of recruiting. She moved out to Portland, Oregon, where she made the jump to a small little company called Nike, and then again moved to Airbnb kind of as they were going through hyper growth, and yet found her way home back to the defense tech industry, and is now leading people operations for Second Front Systems. And so has an amazing perspective on all things recruiting, and especially on our industry. And Amanda, maybe that's where we can kick off, is just, you've been all over the place in some really, really incredible companies. Why is it that you find yourself back in defense tech right now?
Yeah, great question. And thank you all for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I love the Defense Tech newsletter. I think it's just a really helpful resource because a lot of people are interested in this space, and it's great to get people awareness around the growth that's happening across the board. So through a series of kind of unfortunate and fortunate events, the economy and high growth startups have been through a lot over the last couple of years in particular. I did a short stint in fintech and e-commerce post-COVID, and in particular, being in recruiting is not is not the best place to be when the economy is struggling. And so I found myself kind of having my job impacted, my role impacted. And so when I went sort of to market with the job search most recently, I actually just saw a post from our director of operations that who is a former SkillBridge intern, so transitioning out of the Army, and said, I'm looking for my first recruiter. I'm people operations. I'm looking for someone to partner with to help us grow. And I love growth. I love high growth startups. I've been doing this a little bit of a glutton for punishment, going on 15 years now with a couple stints in some larger places. But that LinkedIn post just like grabbed my attention. And so I reached out to her directly and said, like, I could be your person. I've done this before. I know defense tech. It's been a minute, but I'm excited about this work. And so went through interview process, met with a lot of, and realized that I had really been missing the mission focus. And I'd been, again, worked in some great companies, Nike and Airbnb, really wonderful places to be. But none of the other companies I'd worked for since I left Palantir really left me with a strong connection to the mission. Personally, I don't have like family that comes from the military, besides my grandparents. And so there was just a lot of it that hadn't really like been part of my day-to-day life. And then, talking to Christy, who's our director of operations, and then talking to other individuals here, I realized I really wanted to work for a company that I thought was making a difference. And so in my search, as I was talking to a lot of other both early stage high growth startups, but also later more established companies, the mission is really what got me back, what got me into Second Front, and what makes me so excited about the work that we're doing. So I think and I think just broadly right now, defense tech is a really good place to be for a lot of different reasons. Some of the fluctuations we're seeing in the market, defense tech and the government space is there's a little bit more stability and consistency, right? Like this is all really critical work that we're doing. There is budget allocated to it. So there's, I think, again, a little bit more stability and consistency than you might see in other high growth startups. And I think, again, for people that are looking for that mission focus, there aren't a huge amount of opportunities right now that allow for that. And so it also gives us, I think, a really unique edge. And on the flip of that, it's not the right place for everybody. And that is also okay too, right? Like high growth startups are not the right place for everybody. There's a chaos that we'll talk about that's associated with it. And also defense tech, right? We certainly, when we talk to candidates here, people express concerns with the mission and what we're doing. And honestly, if you're not bought into that, we're not going to convince you otherwise, right? Like, we want this for everybody to be more than just a job. We're all like laser focused on the mission.
It's a great overview, and I think that's exactly, the being able to have folks self-select and say, I want in or I want out is a beautiful thing. There's nothing worse than something that's unequivocally, appeals to everybody. So just looking through the chat, we've got federal employee in national security space, U.S. Army special operator, currently on a fellowship, active duty Marine, recent computer science grad, private equity investor, looking to transition in, and a recent PhD student. So a really interesting cross-section of folks on the call, which is fantastic. And Amanda, I think that maybe brings us to the next question, which is how do you think about what you're looking for in both technical and non-technical candidates, kind of generally in defense tech, and maybe a little bit at Second Front specifically?
Yeah. And I think generally interest in the space is really critical. I think we're coming out of a market where people were really chasing dollars, and that was okay. The market was there, the money was there. But given, especially in high growth startups, there's a large, the work is intense, right? Like we are not clock in at 9, clock in at 5. So you really have to be connected to the mission and what you're doing and what you're building, and kind of keep the broader end game in mind. I think so. Interest in the space, and as I was kind of prepping for this, curiosity is something that comes up for me over and over again, in terms of like if, we are not just another B2B SaaS product. As in particular, Second Front, our product offering, our platform is very, very complex technically. And so the space is massively complex. And what we're trying to do is a big disruption to the way things have always been done. And so if you don't have curiosity and don't want to like poke holes in that or dig a little bit deeper, then I think that that's a sign that perhaps Second Front or whatever company you're applying to might not be the right place for you. And again, that's totally okay. You want to find that spark and that light with whatever it is that you're doing. The other thing is hustle. And this is one of the things I talk constantly about with my hiring managers and our teams. It's a hard thing to measure for in an interview, but it's also a hard thing to teach. It's something that I look at, like individuals that I've hired who've worked for me in recruiting and people capacity, teaching people to like really care and have a sense of urgency around what they're doing, while also not always feeling like your hair's on fire. It's a hard balance to strike between those two things. Some of it just gets a little easier with time and wisdom. But if you're just looking for predictability, if you're just looking to collect a paycheck, any early stage high growth startup is probably not going to be the right match for you. And Lauren, I'll get to your question maybe towards the end, because I think that's like a very complex and nuanced thing that there might be some follow up on, but definitely want to make sure that we'll tackle that.
Yep. No, I appreciate it. I mean, I think it's a good overview there. I actually want to go to a different question, or a slightly different question, which is for the things that you're talking about of hustle and grit, of enthusiasm for the industry. What are some things that stand out to you, things that candidates have done beyond? I mean, it's easy to go into an interview and say, yeah, I work really hard, or I work really long hours, right? What are things that you've seen candidates do that really stick out, or that you would recommend candidates consider to kind of differentiate themselves in a hiring process?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think, some of it seems very basic, or at least, again, feels basic because I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, is really come in prepared. I am constantly shocked by how often a candidate will show up on a recruiter screen with myself and not know, like, which job was this again? Who, like what? Oh, and I understand the market's tough. People are casting wide nets, but if a recruiter or a hiring manager takes the time to schedule a call with you, they're going to hopefully show up to be prepared to speak to you and have looked at your resume and be prepared ahead of time. So prepare, like, understand what the company is that you are, the company that you're interviewing for, have a basic high level understanding of what they do. We're not going to expect a candidate to know the ins and outs and nuances of a product or an offering or a company at the very first call, but at least show you've done some homework and know the basics. And I think the other thing is, for like a product like ours, which is really complicated, I want to hear, like, so tell me what your understanding of what Second Front is. What do we do? It's okay if you get it wrong, right? Like, I mean, if you kind of are hitting some high points because you're just going off of what you've seen on our website, that's totally fine. But to just not even try is definitely going to be, especially in this market, is going to be a non-starter. So really spend time understanding, what the company does. Also, genuinely understanding why you're interested. So for me, candidates that have stood out usually are people who have personal stories or connections that they're not afraid to share, of, my father was in the military, or my brother or sister, and not everybody is going to have those stories. But again, I think that shows that you're invested in the mission, which often does translate to, like, I will try hard because I ultimately care about what we're doing and what we're building. I also think follow-up is really important, and something that is kind of gotten lost. I come from the time where we actually handwrote thank you notes after interviews. I know that doesn't happen anymore, and I don't expect it to, especially in a fully remote world. But taking a moment to follow up with your interviewer after, or send your recruiter a note to pass on to the hiring manager, whomever you've interviewed with, does not have to be long, just a couple of sentences. But those types of things, like, genuinely do make a candidate stand out in this market. And they're not hard, they're not expensive, and they're not time consuming things to do. Another thing, like for me, that recently stood out was I try to have a couple of challenging questions in my interview because I want to see how they'll think through giving me an example of, for me, one of my favorite questions is, tell me about a time you had, you really messed something up. I like to call it your like, oh my goodness moment, like where you think you might lose your job over something that happened. We've all had them before. And I've had candidates come back and say, I reflected further and I don't think I gave you a good answer, but like, here is a time that I really messed something up and here's what I learned from it. And so interviews are uncomfortable. We're all, people are nervous. We understand people stumble, but like, if something sits with you and you want to correct it, go back, go back, take the time. Because also that's good practice, that maybe a question that comes up again in another interview, and now you've got your own stories, you've got more examples to pull from. All of that can just help you be better for other interviews as well. The other thing is ask for feedback. Don't do it immediately in the interview. That I would argue is a little bit of a peeve of recruiters. When we get to the end and someone asks how they've done, it puts us on the spot a little bit and can be a little uncomfortable. But after the call is over, or if you don't move forward with the role, my recruiters and this is a habit that I've always done is offer to give people feedback. Not all recruiters will do it. You're not going to see it everywhere you are. But if somebody gives you the opportunity to have a feedback call, even if it's after you've been rejected, and I know that feels really crappy, take it. Like I always send a 15-minute scheduling link when I send a rejection notice. I'm always surprised at how many people don't take me up on that, because that's like 15 minutes of interview feedback that I'm giving you that will hopefully make the rest of your job search easier.
That's incredible. I actually, so there's feedback for candidates in this, and Amanda, I think we're also going to have to do a session on feedbacks for other recruiters, because that's such a gift, and it takes time. And I recognize that there's excellence in all professions, but that's really that's unique and special that you do that. Some questions popping into the tab over there. I'm gonna, for folks, if you have questions for Amanda, go ahead and drop them in. I'm gonna ask one or two more, and then we're going to turn there. I think, one, Amanda, as we mentioned, there's a number of different types of populations or types of people represented in this chat and in the community broadly. I'm curious, for if we think about kind of early career and kind of like transitioning mid-career, and then and maybe calling out veterans in particular, what are some of the roles that you see as kind of best fits for those different populations, and how they can best prepare to make that shift?
Yeah, we do skill bridge hiring. And so this does come up for us as we think about how are some of these skills going to translate from active service, early in career folks who've never worked, in an office. Well, we're not even in an office, people who are coming out of school and haven't been, worked in kind of a corporate setting before. So I think some of it is understanding how your skills and this is, I think, maybe more for like veterans in particular, how have the skills that you've picked up in service, how will they translate into a private sector setting? I know there are more and more programs assisting with that transition. But understanding like what are, project management, because there's a lot of, unfortunately, tech skills that aren't going to translate. And that's part of the problem Second Friend is trying to solve, right, is like getting better tech into the hands of warfighters. But understanding how your skills might translate. Also understanding how you learn. This is something that has evolved a lot with like learning and development programs, across different companies. And so having a good plan and being able to articulate how, if you are going up against a candidate who has industry experience, who's, been in a tech startup for 2 years and like, knows Slack and knows Google and all the tools and systems that they're going to be using, understand and be able to articulate how you can get up to speed. And there's so many free resources. There's so many, my husband calls it YouTube University, because like you can find videos on everything on YouTube, right? So really spend the time understanding what tech stacks look like within most companies. And there's a question in here about sort of what are some of the hard skills, like project management tools are pretty much used universally across the board. I was at Asana. We just saw a preview for Hive that our company is considering. Jira. Like there's so many different ones. all of them translate. Like if you use one, you can pick up others. Slack, figuring out how you best can structure your day to keep out the noise. This is something that's very like that like engineers in particular, we see a lot is they do, we have no meeting Wednesdays or magic time Wednesdays where internally we don't book any meetings with our engineering team so that they can have a full day of deep focus coding time. That's not possible for all teams, definitely not possible for my world. But again, understanding how you operate and how you can be productive, especially in a fully remote environment where you have a huge amount of accountability to deliver and nobody's watching your shoulder. So really understanding like how you learn, how do you like to plan, like where your working genius zone. So like some people are like, I'm an early morning person. I want to be at my desk at 6 a.m. Some people are like, I work best after my kids go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. There's no wrong, right? And one of the beautiful things about being remote is we have that flexibility. I happen to work best after my kids go to bed. So my team knows that like, they might get a ton of stuff from me at 8, 9, 10 o'clock Pacific, but I don't expect them to respond to any of it. That's just my like deep work zone because nobody else can find me at that time because almost everybody else on the East Coast is already in bed. So, you got to figure out what works for you. I think the other thing is, again, like understanding how you best learn and making an attempt to understand what's going on in the tech space. So I always like to ask candidates for all the different positions is like, how do you get up to speed on a new tool? When we have new hires join who have never been in Slack, it's like the one thing that I tell them, carve out time early in your tenure here to get Slack set up in a way that works for you, whether that's silencing notifications, whether that's, however you need to use it, you've got to become proficient in those tools really, really quickly. And tool fatigue is also a very real thing. We're constantly using new things. So figuring out like how you can adopt new tools effectively.
Thanks for that. No, this is great. All right, let's turn to some audience questions. I think one just kind of thinking about before even we've talked a lot about interviews. How about getting an interview? I think we've probably shifted a little bit more to a buyer's market, so to speak, of companies have a little bit more power today. Applicants had a bit more power a few years ago. What are some things that the question from Eric is, are there some hacks that might help guarantee an interview or help get you in the door?
Yeah, it's changed dramatically. So just, 2 years ago, we were in a place where companies couldn't hire fast enough. The quiet quitting and the great resignation, and everyone was like, oh, if I don't like you as my boss, I'm just going to go make more money somewhere else. Like everybody was investing in DEI programs, in veteran programs and training, and like it's all gone. It was so fast, which is really unfortunate on a lot of different levels. We are now where we were probably, the reason I actually got into Palantir, 15 years ago was because of the last economic downturn where I was impacted by a law firm layoff and then completely accidentally landed at Palantir. So we're now back in that space where the market is a lot harder. There's less opportunities out there. Tech was for a while not really considered risky, and now it is a risky place. Smaller tech companies aren't going to be competing with large companies from a compensation perspective. It's just like the landscape has changed so dramatically, so quickly. So there's a couple of things you can do. One is find newsletters like Defense Tech Jobs. Like there's a lot of curated lists and groups out there that will help you target specific focus areas or companies or spaces that will have jobs that may not be listed broadly on like Indeed or LinkedIn. So leverage those types of resources and also networking and introductions and connections. I think this is one of the things that feels not great all the time, but is also a reality of when we post a customer success manager role and get 200 something applications within 24 hours. And we're a tiny startup that most people have never heard of before, right? So that's a lot of inbound interest really quickly. And so, if you do your diligence, spend time on LinkedIn, find those mutual connections, and don't be afraid to ask for introductions. I think I'm constantly getting hit up in my network, and especially if it's someone that I worked with and know and I'm happy to vouch for, I am more than happy to facilitate an introduction. If I don't know somebody, or like I'm connected to lots of people that I've never met or really worked with, I'm not going to go out on a limb for somebody that I've never met before. But even if it's just, hey, I belong to this same community as this individual, I've never worked with them, but just want to help facilitate an introduction. That is the way, that is, social media has made the world a lot smaller. So we should be able to leverage that. I think the other thing is making sure your resume is nice and clean. And AI frankly makes this a whole lot easier. I don't think anybody has an excuse today to not have a really nice, clean, tight resume. You can pay for professional resume review. You can throw things into Chat GPT. Recruiters typically spend 30 seconds on a resume. And if it is a novel, I can guarantee you most of us tune out pretty quickly. So figure out how to keep it concise. And if you have the opportunity to do a quick cover letter, recruiters have varying opinions on this. I always read them. Again, it shouldn't be a novel, but when you're applying for a company because you're truly passionate about what they're doing, 2 sentences about why you're interested in Second Front, why you believe what we're doing is important, that isn't clearly generic, will, for me, push a resume through for a phone screen that maybe I was on the fence about. So just spending a little extra time, especially for the roles that you're excited about.
I think it's a great one. It's very easy to say you're passionate, but if you're not passionate enough to write the extra, spend the extra few minutes and write the cover letter, it's actions speak louder than words. Yeah. I like that a lot. Let's do the flip side of this, because I think this is a good follow-up question, which is, if somebody is not successful in an application process, how do you advise that they re-engage? Should they wait a certain amount of time before reapplying? Should they follow up with folks? Should they just give up and move on? How do you think about kind of reapplicants?
Yeah, I think reapplying is great. Companies are reposting and hiring for roles all the time. We very regularly will revisit what we call sort of silver medal candidates, or we often have processes. We're in the midst of one right now where we have a role where we have 2 candidates that, if we had 2 roles, we would love to hire them both. Unfortunately, headcount constraints, we can only hire one person. If we ever have another role that opens up in that sector capacity, we will reach out to that person right away. In fact, we've actually done this. We just hired somebody a few weeks ago because they were so close. The last time we had posted this position, we had to reopen it. We reached out to them. They were interested. It was and he is thriving. He's a couple weeks in and absolutely thriving, and we're thrilled that he's here. So, so do re-engage. I think the best thing you can try to do is find out who the recruiters are there. And in small tech companies, there's not going to be a lot of us. And just reach out and say, hey, I got this rejection note. Do you have any feedback for me? Do you have time for a quick informational call? Again, just going that extra step and really showing that you're really genuinely interested, and not just throwing a bunch of applications out there to see what comes back, is something that I would recommend. And the worst thing that happens, which isn't great, is it goes into a black hole and you never hear back. I like to think that the recruiters on my team and myself really try hard to circle back with everybody.
What do you think about the direct direct engagement as well? If a role is posted, and maybe this is something you don't want to say publicly, but how do you look at folks reaching out to you cold on LinkedIn, even if it's not, and saying, hey, do you have a few minutes to chat about this, or to recruiters generally? What do you think about that kind of outreach?
Yeah, I think in this market, you've got to do whatever it takes. I unfortunately just don't have capacity to do informational calls anymore because I'm owning recruiting and all things people operations. But I do respond to almost every single LinkedIn request that comes to me. I don't accept every request that comes in. If you don't put a comment or a note or make it somehow personal, I'm probably not going to respond. But if you take a moment to send an email or write a note saying, hey, I see her at Second Front. I've been eyeing their customer success roles. I'm really interested in getting in. Like, any tips that you have would be great. You're probably going to hear back from me. And I would say the same of anyone on my team.
That's awesome. And I think it's the famous, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
It's
Put
totally
yourself
true.
out there. Worst thing that happens is you're in the same place as you are going in. Cool. I know we're just at halfway mark, or we're just halfway past the hour. So we're just about out of time. Amanda, do you have time for one more? Or do you got to run?
Oh yeah, sorry. I thought we were going an hour, so I'm totally good.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, look, bonus time. If folks want to stay, we'll keep rolling for a little bit then, and get a few more questions answered. I see we still got pretty strong attendance here. Okay, cool. So let's actually maybe do this one then. Amanda, your team at Second Front, this ties to it. One of the questions that came in is about kind of some of the different high impact roles on the non-technical side. But let's do the technical side too. Can you walk us through how is Second Front organized as a company today? Like, what are the different functional areas? And maybe a little bit about kind of where you all are growing within that construct.
Yeah. So we're structured the way a lot of tech and traditional companies are organized. So we have kind of the product side of the house, which is our engineers, our security engineers, and our security team, product managers, designers, everyone that's really involved in sort of like core product creation or security for our case for said product. Then we've got growth or go to market. So that's all of our marketing efforts, sales, customer success and account management, revenue operations, all the things that basically make us money. And then we've got then operations. So operations, finance, finance and accounting, recruiting, people operations, like general operations. So those are kind of everywhere I've worked, roughly, that's how sort of like companies are divided, with like three main buckets. We're growing everywhere. I would say the least in operations, and because product is creating product, right, which then sells, and so engineers we're almost always, companies are always hiring engineers, just because there's always a longer list of features that companies want to build than they have engineers and time to build them. The growth team, sales in particular, they're revenue generating. And so there's always like ratios set up for how many sales, once you hit so many sales dollars, it opens up so that you can hire even more salespeople. So those are all roles that are either product generating or revenue generating. So they typically are allocated more generous headcount. Operations is a cost center. For better or worse, it just is, right? Like I'm only costing the company money. Hopefully I'm also saving the company money if I do my job well, but we're not revenue generating. And so operations teams do tend to run a little bit leaner. However, they're also, I would argue the people function in particular and talent acquisition is so critical to, culture, which I think is another terminology or term that is so thrown around in tech that means a lot of different things. And so in terms of hiring, we're hiring across the board. We secured funding in December, but we're also trying to hire very carefully. We don't want to be in a position where we're going through a reduction in force or a layoff. We also want to make sure we're bringing in high caliber of talent. And often when you go through a kind of high growth, when you hire your first like 10, 20 employees, and then you get to 100 and the needs of the business change. And sometimes very organically people grow with that. We see this all the time. Example, the woman who hired me, our director of operations, came in as a SkillBridge intern, and her role has like taken so many twists and turns because she's just been killing it. And then sometimes people are like, well, I really want to have my hands in everything. When you get bigger, you get more siloed. It's just the nature of the game. And some people really like to be in seed stage where they're wearing a million different hats and they don't want to give up responsibilities. Whereas when you scale, you have to give things up and kind of, things have to come off of your plate. So some of it is just stage. I think there's a question in here about like high impact, non-technical roles. I think roles like in operations and strategy, which is a term I don't love, can be really valuable if it's tied to being able to showcase data performance output, right? So recruiting, we've got, we pull metrics on funnel metrics and pass-through rates and offer acceptance rates, and everything is so data informed these days that if you're going to be in a non-technical, non-sales role where there's like targets, metrics, like very clear numbers that are associated with the work that you do. If you're going to be in sort of the operations realm, you want to make sure that you're working in a role that has clear deliverables and prioritization tied to it. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that early growth startups face. And I see this at Second Front. I've seen this many places that I've worked, is if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. And you have to make, just like when you're doing headcount, it'd be great if I could hire for every single thing I want. I know that the budget's not there, and I have to make hard trade-offs around, do I want an HRBP, a human resource business partner, or do I want another recruiter? And like when I'm making those decisions, I have to look at headcount plans. I have to look at the makeup of the business. I have to look at some of the challenges we're facing. I have to look at, okay, this year we need to roll out performance reviews, and we need to roll out a new compensation structure. So I'm probably going to hire an HRBP because a recruiter is not going to be able to do all of those things. So sorry about, I kind of went off a little bit into left field on that one, but I think like there are a lot of strong use cases in operations, but I would say that in ops, you probably have to be the most flexible and agile because you are going to be hitting a lot of different things, and you've got to be able to pivot really quickly.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about, let's hit this one before we go into sales. We talked a little bit about strategy, you and I did. And I think you've got some good takes on this. There's a lot of folks who do strategy. I myself am guilty. I worked for a management consultancy right out of school. We're told that we're big picture strategic thinkers. What does strategy mean in the startup context, or what roles are strategic, and what advice do you have for folks who kind of see themselves in strategy roles?
Yeah, I think the biggest, and it's so people have such strong opinions about the big consulting firms, and I've worked with phenomenal people who have come from those environments and people that really struggle to get things across the finish line. So I think that's the key thing when you're in-house versus coming from like a consultancy. Consultancies are great with asking the right questions to get individuals and companies to think more critically about the problems that they're solving. And then they kind of give you a blueprint, and then they like move on to their next project. I think when you're in-house doing strategy, there's an extra layer of like accountability and delivery that maybe doesn't exist in like a consultancy environment. And so and that's also why a lot of people move to come in-house, is because, or even recruiters, why they go from agency to in-house, is because you want to see something through all the way to the end. And I think that is the big draw. Like there's more risks, there's less, you're not paid quite as well as you are in the big consultancies, but like you also are building something that you get to put your name on, and you get to see it evolve and grow. And I think that's something that's really special for people that, again, want to have that high level of connection.
Absolutely. It's know what game you're playing, right? Know what kind of phase of life you're in. Another question in here is around, I think it's a good one. Advice for landing sales roles if you don't have experience selling to DoD. I know this is one that comes up a lot. If you've served in the military, are you shooing for a sales role? Like, what do you all look for if not straight bag carrying, quota hitting, sales rep?
Yeah, I think sometimes you've got to take a step back to move into a new industry. And this is true of all things. If you want to get into federal sales and you've been sort of like an SMB account rep and you want to transition, there's a possibility you might need to take like a BDR or like a sales rep role. A good company will have, and we're building this right now, the playbook for like, how do you get from BDR to SMB to enterprise AE? Some people love to be an SMB, for their entire career. So I think part of it is understanding you've got to kind of learn the ropes, and what does that look like? I think the other thing is there is so much more information out there. So, understanding, to be able to, if you can get your foot in the door and get an interview, showcasing that you understand like how federal sales cycles or selling into the DoD is so dramatically different than selling into like a B2B SaaS company, and just demonstrating that like you understand the nuance that's there. You understand that the timetables are significantly longer than selling into, a B2B SaaS company. So, and then finding mentors within the space, like connecting with sales folks. Again, I'm not super connected to the sales space in general, but I know there's tons of like Slack groups and organizations and meetups. There are great sales people who have transitioned out of like bag carrying reps to becoming managers. We have a really phenomenal BDR manager. Getting connected with those people and understanding how they've made transitions or how they think about hiring. And again, like leverage, like salespeople are probably the best of this out of anybody, is like leveraging those networks and making, getting somebody on the phone with you. But doing the research and showing that you have the capacity to shift gears and pick up a totally new sales motion, especially if that's something you're really passionate about.
Awesome. I'll make one last call. If anybody has any final questions, to drop them in the questions bar now. Otherwise, Amanda, I'll ask you just maybe for, here we go. Yeah. Do you have any call outs for networking groups and meetups and Slack? I'll tell you. So Carter, you asking this question. One is, we have a Slack channel, right? There's a Defense Tech Careers community that is actually, we haven't even publicly launched it yet, but it's at a little over kind of 120, 130 people. We'll have chats like these, mentorship opportunities, and some training opportunities still to come. But Amanda, I don't know if there's any that you want to call out from your experience.
No, I belong to a handful that are like recruiting and people specific that I have found so massively valuable, especially in the move to remote, or when you're a small team, I was a team of one for a while. And it's great that you all are launching one. I think there's so many people out there that really do want to mentor and really kind of get lit up from doing this, having these types of engagements. If you have a mentor that's not super engaged, probably time for another mentor. So you also, even though you're all on the market right now, you should be picky about who you're choosing to spend your time and energy and mentorship with. So, again, it's part of it is just not being afraid to put yourself out there and asking. I'm starting to see more and more live pop-ups come up. So in Portland, there's like an AI meetup that I'm as reluctant as I am, I will probably attend at some point. I'm a reluctant adopter. I know I just came off of an HR conference where we talked a lot about AI, but so look for local meetups within your areas, especially if you're in, or even like various veteran community meetups, right? They've probably got inroads. Larger companies will almost always have like ERGs for like veteran communities or various communities. So those are other ways that often those are larger groups, larger presence, and ways for you to engage kind of within the community as well. And then, sorry, quickly, there was a question about negotiation. A lot of states are now requiring salary ranges to be posted. So if you're interviewing for a fully remote role and there's no salary posted, that's unusual and they're probably not compliant. But most recruiters will ask you what you're looking for. Be honest. Don't be afraid to negotiate. I've loved how much this trend, I love and hate because I have to deal with it, how much this trend has like evolved over the last couple of years, where nobody, like, I can tell you the data was for sure true. Men negotiated more than women. I could say it like very definitively with confidence early in my career. And because we've been talking about it and because you're seeing more about it, everybody is more confident negotiating. Now, just because you negotiate does not mean you're going to get it, but you just like, you don't know if you don't try, and you should be comfortable. I coach friends on this all the time when they're going to ask for salary increases in their current roles. It should not be taboo to talk with your manager. You don't want to do it every week, but like you should expect to have at least once a year, a conversation about your compensation with your manager. And so that building that confidence starts with the interview process. Again, doesn't always mean you're going to get it. The economy is tight. A lot of companies have been freezing salaries so that they don't have to do layoffs. And those are really hard trade-offs and decisions to make. But you should start to at least be comfortable answering or asking for it.
Fantastic. Amanda, I know we've covered a lot of ground. I guess I would just ask any kind of final thoughts, anything else you wanted to share with the community, and any plugs for how folks can stay up to date on Second Front hiring and to kind of follow along with you.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not as active probably as I should be for what I do, but please do engage with me. If you do reach out, like say, hey, I found you on this, I was at your chat, I want to chat more. If I can make introductions, if I can help, if you've got specific questions, we're hiring kind of across the board, engineers, customer success managers, not so much in sales right now. I'm growing my own team. We're hiring a people ops manager. So, we're doing slow and steady growth this year. So keep an eye on our website. We do have SkillBridge opportunities as well. We consider SkillBridge folks across the board. So if you are actively transitioning and eligible to participate in SkillBridge in general, not just with Second Front, highly recommend it. It's a really great way to dip your toe in. Also, if you're like, I might be interested in a startup, but I don't know, SkillBridge is a great way to test the waters. Not high growth startups are not for everybody. It's like one of the reasons I left Nike was I was a little bored, but it was a really great place for me to land with my family for my first year here. I had small kids at the time and my work wasn't that hard. I logged in, went to work, logged out. I didn't take it with me. It was great for what it was at the time. And it's also totally fine if that's where you're at in life, that's what you want. It's just important to recognize that.
Fantastic. Amanda, we're so grateful for your time. This is just your wealth of insight, and really you've managed to just be at some of the most interesting, exciting, and dynamic places at every stage of your career. For everyone who's tuning in, thank you also for spending the time with us this evening. Really appreciate the interest and engagement. For those of you who are interested, next Wednesday will be with Josh McCarver at 12 noon Eastern time. And Josh's particular, that conversation will focus a little bit more on vet transition in particular into tech. So thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate you being here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. And Lauren, if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm happy. I feel like your question was great, but also very nuanced, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.